In a quiet southern town where the blue wall of silence had stood tall for years, a new chapter began with the arrival of one man. He didn't show up with flashing lights or a commanding presence. No escort, no grand announcement, just a weathered shirt, scuffed shoes, and a mission. His name was Richard Nelson, and he had just been appointed chief of police. But instead of walking through the front doors wearing his title, he decided to walk through them as a stranger. No badge, no warning. Because sometimes, to see the truth, you have to blend into the lie. The sun hadn't fully broken the horizon when Richard parked his car in the back of the Blue Ridge Police Department. He looked like a man who had nowhere to be. A wandering figure, unshaven, invisible to those who deemed themselves important. As he stepped inside the precinct, no one recognized him. That's how he wanted it. The halls echoed with arrogance, casual laughter, and unchecked ego. He was watching, listening, learning. And then it happened. One officer, well known for his brashness, confronted Richard. He didn't ask questions, didn't show concern. What he showed was pure contempt, mockery, disrespect. And then, for no reason other than cruelty and confidence that there'd be no consequences, the officer spat in Richard's face. The room burst into laughter. But Richard didn't react with rage. He didn't flinch. He simply wiped his face, took a breath, and walked away. An hour passed. Then came the call for all personnel to report to the main briefing room. Officers shuffled in, some still grinning from the earlier incident. They didn't know what was coming. When Richard walked to the front of the room this time, he wasn't just a stranger. He carried a folder stamped with the department seal. His posture had shifted. His silence was gone. And the air changed. Because now, they knew. The man who had been laughed at, disrespected, spit on, was their new chief of police. What followed wasn't a rage-filled speech. It was a reckoning, calm, cold, clear. Richard spoke about what he'd seen, how a stranger had been treated not as a potential ally, not even as a human being, but as garbage. He spoke of culture, of decay, of a system built on silent cruelty and unchecked power. And he made it clear. Things were going to change. Immediately. The officer who had spat in his face was suspended on the spot. No defense, no delay. Because a uniform without integrity is just a costume. Behind closed doors, the fallout began. Files were pulled. Complaints, long buried, were uncovered. Richard didn't come to play politics. He came to clean house. Some officers resigned, others were reassigned. And those who had once thrived in shadows now found themselves standing in the light. But amid the reckoning came something else. Hope. A few brave officers began stepping forward. They shared stories they were once too afraid to tell. They asked questions. They listened. And slowly, a toxic culture began to shift. Outside the station walls, the community took notice. For years, residents had whispered about what went on behind the badge, about intimidation, about silence. Now, for the first time, they saw a chief who wasn't afraid to confront it. At a community outreach event weeks later, a young boy nervously approached Richard. The child had been taught not to trust cops. But something about Richard was different. He listened. He answered. He promised to do better. Not just with words, but with action. And the people began to believe. Over the months that followed, the precinct transformed. New policies were enforced. Training programs emphasized not just tactics, but ethics. Complaints were investigated, not ignored. And most importantly, officers were held accountable. The man who walked in with spit on his face left a different kind of mark. One that wouldn't fade. Not everyone embraced the change. Some still clung to old habits, resentful of a new order. But they found themselves isolated, outnumbered by a rising tide of officers who wanted to serve, not control. Protect, not intimidate. Richard didn't just change a department, he changed a direction. By the end of his first year, Richard Nelson had earned more than a title. He'd earned respect, not because he demanded it, but because he lived it. He never brought up the day he was spat on. He didn't need to. Everyone remembered. Not because of the act, but because of what followed. Because the true measure of a leader isn't how they react to disrespect, it's how they respond to injustice. And Richard Nelson responded with transformation. In law enforcement, uniforms can grant power, but only character earns trust. And one man proved that sometimes, to clean a house, you have to walk through its door like you don't belong. Only then can you see what needs to be swept out. Leadership isn't about rank. It's about responsibility. Richard Nelson, Chief of Police.